In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Good morning. So today, the gospel for today is from Matthew 6. And right away when we say Matthew 6, we should remember where does that come from. Matthew 6 comes from the Sermon on the Mount. So we wanted to talk about this gospel today. It's Matthew 6. By the way, today we read Matthew 6, 1 to 18. Next week we're going to continue the chapter, and it's going to talk about the treasures in heaven. So tomorrow, God willing, we as the church, we will be starting Lent. So our beloved mother, the church, before we're starting Lent, is telling us how to do things and how not to do things. How to pray and how not to pray. How to fast and how not to fast. How to do acts of mercy or charitable deeds and how not to do acts of mercy and charitable deeds. There is a right way of doing it and there is a wrong way of doing it. And today, before Lent starts, the church is reminding us how to do things the right way. So the gospel of today is Matthew 6, Sermon on the Mount. So I hope that all of the HRC family know where is the Sermon on the Mount. It's the first thing when you say Sermon on the Mount is going to come Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So Matthew 6 is that center of the Sermon on the Mount. So here what we're talking, the Matthew 6 starts out by warning us. It's like basically, be careful. And it's Matthew 6:1 tells us, take heed, be careful that you don't do your righteous deed, your charitable deed, don't do your good deeds in front of people. And ultimately the goal here is your heart. Are you looking to be seen by them? So when we do a charitable deed or a good act or an act of mercy or fasting and prayer, the heart is not seeking to be seen by men. And here this is the goal of this part of the sermon today. And he's going to go, Christ is going to talk to us about 3 ingredients of a growing spiritual life. The 3 ingredients. The 3 ingredients are this: acts of mercy, praying, and fasting. You can always do acts of mercy on its own. There's nothing wrong. There's some ingredients that you can just put on your own. Like for instance, when you use vanilla in cooking. You can't just vanilla and eat it. It doesn't work. You have to mix it with other things. So same things with these ingredients in spirits. There are some things you can't just do on its own. And one of them in these 3 criterias here, you can't just fast on your own. Fast and that's it. Fasting always goes hand in hand with prayer. Fasting by itself is basically vegan. And sometimes we get very obsessed with the fasting and the ingredients, and that was as if this is the goal. And here what the message I'm telling you is that fasting on its own needs something with it. It cannot, like an ingredient that cannot go with something else. There's a lot of people that are vegan. So fasting has to go hand in hand with prayer. So this is very important, and actually you're going to hear in the fraction today that the priest is going to say, fasting and prayer raise the light out of heaven. Fasting and prayer, it's never always fasting itself. Fasting and prayer goes hand in hand. Fasting and prayer saved Daniel from the lion's den. Fasting and prayer casts out demons. And then it says that Moses pursued fasting and prayer until he got the 10 commandments. The Ninevites pursued fasting and prayer. The prophets pursued fasting and prayer. The apostles, the martyrs, they all pursued fasting and prayer. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that you understand, that fasting on its own needs something with it. And that is prayer and acts of mercy. So these are the 3 things that the beginning of chapter 6 talks to us about. And I want to go through it, and I want to compare the 3 aspects. And every part of it, by the way, it starts out by acts of mercy or charitable deeds, and then talks about prayer and talks about fasting. There is a common theme, that there is like a common thread that goes through all 3 when Christ is giving this sermon. So let's look at it really fast, and I highlight the things that was repetitive in all 3 things. So in Matthew 6:2 he says, therefore, when you So whenever the word when means that he expects you. Christ is expecting us to do charitable deeds. He didn't say if you like, no. He says he expected that we're doing charitable deeds. And when you're doing them, this is what he's talking about. So the expectation is for us to do acts of mercy, righteous deeds, charitable deeds. So it says, therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites. Who are the hypocrites? Another word for hypocrite is an actor. An actor. An actor is a hypocrite. Where in the old days, when they used to have a play, there would be an actor with a specific face, and then he goes and he plays another role, so he puts another face, so it's an actor. That's what a hypocrite is. So here what the Lord is teaching us is that when you're doing charitable deeds, don't be an actor. In other words, you want to act in front of people, so what happens in an act, after the actor finishes, the people clap to him. And here what he's saying is that when you're doing acts of mercy, when you're doing acts of good deeds, don't sound the trumpet and let everyone know like an actor. Do not sound your trumpet, be like a hypocrite. Do not do in the synagogues and in the streets that they may have glory from men. What they used to do in the old days is that when somebody is distributing food or distributing something, they would have a trumpet or a guy in front, and he lets everyone know, come. So and so is distributing. So ultimately to give the glory to this person. So he's saying, don't do that. Like the hypocrites in the synagogues used to do. They walk in the streets and they do that. But then he says to us, so this is the wrong way of doing acts of mercy. And then the right way, he says, assuredly I say to you, they have their reward. So when people saw them, they clap, this is a good man, that's their reward. And we said last year, this is a very cheap reward. It's not even worth it. When somebody, you don't benefit anything, only that clap or somebody looks at you that, oh, he's a good person. You care more about the Lord. And then in verse 3 he says, but you, as a Christian, when you do a charitable deed, when you do an act of mercy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That it's so natural that you give and this hand doesn't even know. Of course you know, but it's the example that the Lord is trying to tell you is that you do it so naturally that this hand didn't even notice what this hand did. So ultimately when we do acts of mercy, we need to do it in secret, not looking for the glory. So the common theme is going to be in all of them is when, which means the first highlight is when. And then the second thing is that you are not to do it like a hypocrite. Because if you do it like a hypocrite, like an actor, to get glory for men, you have your reward. I say to you, they have their reward. So that's it. By the way, it's the way that they have their reward, it's like this. It's almost like when you go to a store and you buy something and you pay for it by a credit card, the transaction is closed. That's it. There is nothing else after that. And it's almost like that, is that if you do a charitable deed and you ultimately your heart is seeking to get the glory from men, the transaction is closed. That's it. That's all you're gonna get. There is nothing else, after that. But he's saying that when you do acts of mercy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret. One of the common thread in the three ingredients for spiritual growth is do things in secret, not ultimately to be seen by men. And your Father who sees you in secret will himself reward you openly. So here, this is acts of mercy. So I want to stop here, but we're going to go to the other one, and I want to give you, open your eyes, because this is important, that now tomorrow we're starting Lent. We want to see what can we do different in acts of mercy. And I'm going to give you some ideas, and I encourage you to think about it. How are you going to do acts of mercy? One thing that I'm going to ask you is that always start at home before helping the whole world. Don't do acts of mercy in the whole world, and then you neglect your family from acts of mercy. Okay? So in Matthew 25, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, gives us a lot of acts of mercy. One of them is feed the hungry. You see someone is hungry, help him. Give him food. One of the ways that you can actually do that is you skip your morning breakfast and give that money to somebody that is in need, and ultimately that's, help others that are hungry. Give somebody that needs, if somebody's thirsty, give him water, give him something to drink. This is all from Matthew 25. And then serve somebody that is homeless. Somebody that is homeless, seek to how you can help that person. Visit someone that is sick. And always start home before helping somebody that you don't know and you visit. No, if you know someone in your family that is sick, this is a good opportunity in Lent. You start visiting these people. Give blood. One of the things that we will try to do, inshallah, God willing, in Thursday meeting during Lent is we're gonna work on a blood drive. So give something, somebody that is, give out from your own. Volunteer in a nursing home. Take time, visit somebody that is an elder. Somebody that you know in your family that is an elder, go visit them. If you visit them regularly, well, go visit an elderly neighbor. Always do something out of your normal. Another way of helping somebody is, someone or a family that is suffering from someone that is very sick. Maybe when you cook a double batch and deliver it to that family that is sick. Do these things and think of whatever God has gifted you. Visit someone that maybe has somebody in their family departed recently and it's still mourning. Make it a point during Lent, acts of mercy, go and visit someone. Give up eating something and share it with someone that is in need. One of the ways that some families can do is that in Lent, they'll give up eating out, and whatever money that they save, they will identify a charitable organization and that is close to their heart, and they'll give that money that they saved to that charitable organization. So acts of mercy, do something that having mercy. And the way that I like to acts of mercy, what is acts of mercy? Is that if you see someone is in need and you have what it's required to fulfill that need, like for somebody is drowning and you have a lifesaver in your hand, give them the lifesaver. If you see somebody that is hungry, give them the food and you have the food in your hand. So this is ultimately, you want to start at home. Your spouse, whatever your spouse needs, that's important that you give that spouse whatever that spouse needs and help in that. Your children, and it could be, by the way, spending time or however. Acts of mercy start at home, and then it goes out, and I give you some ideas. The next thing that the church, that Christ talks to us about, acts of mercy, and then prayer. So he says the same thing. When you pray, so it doesn't say if, so Christ expects us to pray. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. So there's nothing wrong really to pray in the synagogues or when it's time to pray. The issue here is to be seen by men. The condition of the heart. You're doing something to be seen by men. And we said that if you're doing that, your heart is conditioned to get the clapping of men, transaction is closed, you have your reward. And the same thing, Christ telling them, surely I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room or your prayer closet at home, and when you have shut your door, it could be the door of where all the distractions in life, and you stop all the distraction in life and go into your prayer corner that we talked about, that I pray that everyone has, a prayer corner. And we said last time is that you want to put your le'an water, your oil, and the icon of the Pantocrator, and this is your prayer corner. So here Christ is saying that when you pray, you don't want to get the glory from man. It's between you and your Father in heaven. And he says, when you have shut your door, shut your closet door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And this is how we ought to pray. So what is prayer? Very fast. Prayer is spending time with the Lord. Entering into your prayer closet, closing all the distractions, the games, the TV or the internet or the social media or whatever, and shut the door, and you're in the presence of Almighty God and speaking to Him. That is prayer. And this is something that we do during Lent, is that we ought to pray more. Spend time more with the Lord. Seeking His face. You see that in Daniel 9:3. It says, then I set my face toward the Lord. This is prayer. You set your face toward the Lord to seek Him in prayer and supplication with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And this is what prayer really is that you're setting your face to the Lord, spending time with Him, talking to Him, pouring your heart, sharing your pains, sharing your suffering, asking for your needs, supplication. Supplication comes from the word supply. In other words, you want to ask for what are your needs. You know, that's important. You can ask that. That's supplication and doing it fervently and so on. So this is very important. Spend time thanking God. Spend time in your prayer closet praying and asking for guidance. It's a very good time when you're fasting, when you're seeking guidance or you're praying for seeking God's will. It's a good time in prayer, in fasting, when you're in abstinence. You are to spend time and ask for these things. One of the ways of acts of mercy and prayer is that in your prayer closet, pray for those who are sick. You always want to think of outside of you. Pray for somebody that might be addicted to a substance or a behavior or an action. This is a good opportunity is in your prayer closet. Pray for that person. That you're regularly praying for people that are in need. Somebody that is oppressed by a specific sin or so on. Pray for these things. So one of the things in Lent, in this journey to Pascha, which is Easter, is that you ought to pray more. You ought to do acts of mercy more. The third thing that we said cannot stand by itself, because vegan by itself is not going to do you any good, is that basically fasting. Fasting and prayer goes hand in hand. And the thing is, it's important for us to fast. If you haven't fasted throughout your, maybe your childhood or your life, this is a good opportunity to start fasting. Talk it over with your father of confession. And if you haven't met with your father of confession, seek one and sit with the father and talk about fasting. You can start small. But ultimately, it's important to fast. And you fast for spiritual gain. One thing that is interesting is that everybody fasts. Whether you're religious or non-religious, every human on earth fasts. Do you know when we fast? When you're asleep. What is fasting, by the way, is abstinence from food. You don't eat or drink. So while you're sleeping, you don't eat and drink. You're fasting. And guess what happens in the morning? What do you do the first thing in the morning? You have what? Breakfast. So what do? You break fast. You break your fast. So here, one of the things is that, yes, it's important for us to fast and abstinence from food. But ultimately, it's to gain a spiritual need. So one of the things in fasting is you break your fast a little later. For instance, if you have your tea, your coffee, or whatever at a specific time, break the fast a little later. And not, like maybe talk it over with you half an hour, and ultimately to replace that tea with something spiritual. It could be reading a spiritual book. So ultimately, we ought to fast. And we ought to fast for spiritual gain, and we replace it with something like, for instance, prayer, reading a spiritual book, and so on. So we all ought to fast, because the Lord taught us in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 6:16, it says, moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites, like an actor. You want to go in front of everyone and tell everyone, hey, you're fasting. He says, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigured their face, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they got their reward. Transaction is closed. That was their reward. And it's cheap reward. It's not even worth it. So here what the Lord is telling us, what they used to do in the old days, is to make sure that everyone knows that they're fasting. It was natural for them to anoint their face with oil, comb their hair, and then in the days of fasting, they would disfigure their face and not do their hair, and everyone would see him and say, what's wrong? He goes, oh, I'm fasting today. And this is what God is telling us not to do. When you're fast, it's between you and your Father in heaven who sees you in secret. But he says, but you, when you fast, anoint your head. In other words, if you regularly put makeup every morning, put makeup every morning. If you regularly put cologne in it, you want to act the same, but ultimately it's the heart, the broken heart, the contrite heart, that fasting heart is what God is seeking, and ultimately you're not doing it to get glory from people. This is the heart condition. What is the heart condition? Is it seeking the glory of men or the glory of God, where you're offering it to the Lord as a broken and a contrite heart? And then he says at the end, but when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. So these are ingredients that our beloved mother, the church, is giving us, that we are to do during this fast, and we ought to do it between us and the Lord, and we ought to do it to seek to offer it as a sacrifice to the Lord out of love, not to get glory of men. And ultimately, it's a preparation to the journey of Pascha, where the resurrection of the Lord. It's ameliorating your spiritual life to be a better person, in order for you to accept, to be ready for this gift of resurrection that we celebrate in Easter, in Pascha. So I encourage you, as families, you want to talk about fasting. You want to talk, because it's very important, as a lot of times the children, they need to be given that venue. A lot of children have the heart. They want to abstain. They want to fast. But then the food is not available. You want to talk it over. And if you haven't in the past, we'll start small. But talk it over as a family and work on it. Even when it comes to acts of prayer. Maybe acts of prayer, acts of mercy. You want to do something as a family. You go visit Giddo or Teta more often that day. Go visit an elder that day. Same thing when it comes to prayer. What the church is offering you, late liturgies, that is after work. I encourage you to take the benefit of this late liturgy. At Holy Resurrection, our liturgy on Wednesdays from 3 to 6. Push yourself to abstain. Break your fast a little later. And ultimately, the whole goal is not the food. The food is not the goal. It's a way to reach the goal. And the goal is to have that broken and a contrite heart, that in Pascha, in Easter, you're offering, just like the Lord offered himself as a sacrifice on the cross, you offer your broken and a contrite heart on Good Friday and say, Lord, I have a broken and contrite. I need you. And this is the journey that we are starting tomorrow. And I encourage you to think about it, talk it over as family, have mercy on each other, and all the glory be to our God forever. Amen.